Hi, Patricia. So why don't we begin by you telling me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you ended up being involved with Chisenhale Dance Space?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I come from New York, and that's where I did my dance training and all my early pieces, and also I'm a founding member of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen's School for Body Mind Centering, and then I wanted to get out of. I wanted another experience, so I planned on coming to Great Britain. It was the first time to come to Europe, and I had a wonderful summer experience and joined a kind of street performing group and fell in love with an Englishman, and it was great, and yeah, and then what happened was I went back to New York, but I thought everything's opening up. I had done, I was still working at the school, with Bonnie, and but young and spirited, and it was a chance. So I went to the UK. I went to Liverpool for a year. I'm laughing. I think it's because I loved the Beatles so much when I was young that I earned a year in Liverpool 8. Anyway, but that already got me into the performance new dance scene, and making contact with people like Mary and Jacky and Fergus and Phil, and then I moved to London, and I moved to a derelict house in in Hackney. So from there, then I connected to X6 more directly, because I had already in my travels connected with X6.
Right.
So so I did a lot of work, workshops and performances at X6 among all of these dynamic people who were coming out of ballet and forging new dance. And of course, coming from New York, I have to say that field was, I wouldn't necessarily more developed. And because I was in New York, you could say, there was a stream of people that kind of work was going on. So they were the radicals coming out of traditional backgrounds. And I was coming from, I didn't follow a traditional. I mean, I did all the dance training, but I did it much more independently than through, let's say, ballet companies or where people were coming from at X6. So why I just say that is so, there was a convergence of this history at X6, and it was a natural fit for me. And contextually, I did, these other ballet fields and all, it was so far away from my own background experience. So I was around X6 a lot. So so when this got initiated, as a project, and because I lived down the street from this derelict building, it was a natural association. And by the time this happened for me, this circle of people, I have a picture, which you probably have a photo, and if you don't, I could dig it up, and early, and everything was just a wreck, and very beautiful picture of young people laughing. And so so this was my circle. These were the people that were open to me and were giving me their platform. And this was like this going to go from X6 to this nameless thing. It wasn't called Chisenhale. It was an era of the commitment was to collective, community spirit. It was poor, it wasn't, it also, we were independent in a way that, you could sort of like, do a handwritten, poster and say you were going to do this and photocopy it. And it was taken seriously. The whole commercial background that it has become, or the marketplace that it developed, became far more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And so the work that people was doing, was much more independent and groundbreaking, because nobody else, you did it in these crazy spaces, London Musicians Collective and Chisenhale, and that was what we did.
Yeah.
So it was a natural fit for me. It was a natural platform, and investing in, it's always, I've always valued that in a way, because there was less around. It gave people an impetus to join forces, because the resources were so limited, and the acknowledgement, and you said the new dance era, it was formulating, so, and that's always the most exciting period, because it's the freest, and people, what they're doing is coming, really out of an inquiry and developing a practice-led, now you have practice-led PhD, it's a whole marketplace. But then, it was, you developed your practice to create your performances. The link between them was, a continuum of engaging with self-knowledge and knowledge from drawing upon, social conditions, now it's called social justice, but especially for me, coming to England, coming to the East End, and people identifying far more with working class values. So it did heighten my political awareness in the context of being in the East End of London, at a far, when I said to you what I wrote to you, it's gotten so much more gentrified. It was not gentrified. When I moved to Hackney, I lived in a derelict house. It was derelict everywhere. So, a mindset around that, as well as, a kind of natural impetus towards innovation that was coming from people's practice. The generation that I come from, that, they made things interdisciplinary. They made that context. They gave the ground to that context. And of course, you just do it because that's the way you get to do anything.
Yeah. You said something about, the openness of it, and, X6 giving you their platform, or the platform that they created through the space. I just think that openness in terms of disciplines and backgrounds. So, people like Cris and Phil that didn't come from performance backgrounds in the sense of dance, but they were poets or musicians. And so that interdisciplinary that occurred kind of organically by the openness of the platform. And
also that people's own, within, let's say, dance and performance practice were opening up as well and bringing in other disciplines. That's what I did. It wasn't like, I think I'm going to go and do this now. And so that this organicity of an exchange, it was natural to people's who they were and what they were interested in, and how they were developing work and developing themselves. And so those boundaries were quite more flexible.
Whilst you were talking, I was thinking about the interdisciplinary nature of X6 or Chisenhale, and what was going on at that time came from a desire or need to question everything and whether that's practice and what is dance, or what can be dance, and who can be a dancer. But it's also, like you say, a really political thing that comes from the rejection of ballet and
the tyranny of the standard, right? Which I think is still there, not as much, but it's always there. But this was an inflection point, as they call it, now, of and within the whole context, of the 60s and all the counterculture, becoming what the youth movement of the time was questioning. And so you didn't question it in a little box, you question it in your life.
Yeah. And so when the group, the collective, moved to Chisenhale, obviously there was a sort of wider group of artists as well that came from Butler's Wharf and some, maybe some others too.
Well, yeah, there was quite a, I mean, because a lot of people who were in the, collected around X6 were very enthusiastic. I think X6 was closing, they couldn't, so it was like sink or swim, let's swim. And, and because of the era of let's do this and let's, form a collective, effort, because doing this alone is not going to happen. We don't have the resources for this.
Yeah, there's something that I've read Jacky and Emlyn saying before in their writing, that it was a collective, but it was a collective that was necessary in order to support the individual voice, and that was often the individual female voice that had been suppressed. But through that, you could develop your practice and develop yourself, not just your practice. It was very personal as much as it was about dance practice.
Yes, and self-development and art practice and performance were a stream moving through, right? This was necessary. And I think that's where the innovation was able to blossom.
And how would you describe what you were doing at Chisenhale at that time?
Well, there were a lot of different phases. I was developing my vocal dance practice. What it was, I was working with somatics before it was called somatics. I was working with things like interior space in the body, like the organs, and voice. This was like, talk about a no-no. I wasn't just speaking. I was I was using sound. So yeah, this was all raw and innocent, and exciting, and just, again, the self-development of that into an artistic practice was just so rich. So in terms of my own engagement in my own practice, Chisenhale, was the place where that could develop for me. It gave me a base. It gave me people around, who I could exchange with, and exchange both in terms of performance and exchange humanly, and exchange, as you said, in terms of the context of how we were working, where we were working. There were resources between. So, I mean, that's where I worked. I was also able to do some amount of touring, again, very independently, always with, teaching as the main way to make a living, but also always like offering a performance. So, so that was my life. Very vital to all aspects, personal, creative, intellectual, educational, and livelihood. It was this a center of in all those ways for me, and very important. Very vital to my development.
Before, I guess, maybe even the projects and development on practice and collaborations could kind of get underway, there was a lot of work that needed to be done initially on the building itself. So much
that was really hard. First of all, as you probably know, they lifted a lot of wood from X6, little discreetly. All that had to get hauled there. The place was just derelict. There was nothing. The windows were broken, and I have to say, in the beginning, when people were a bit enthusiastic, a lot of people came and swept and did things for a while, as people do. But it was a long, arduous process of, and different times people holding it together. And, Philip and Doug Gill, they really built the floor. Yeah, as I said, all the windows were broken, and that fire escape, so there was a lot of like getting dirty and hauling things around.
Yeah. And then I guess there's all the other stuff that's tied into having a building, which is establishing or considering who you are and what you're doing in that particular community, and then trying to negotiate with funders or the council. And
all of that was long meetings. But, it wasn't just talk. It couldn't be. It had to be action. It had to be written. It had to be formulated. that it would meet the demands of the situation and the political atmosphere of at that time. So it was a lot of meetings and a lot of push and pull, and but not never, yeah, push and pull as a dynamic.
Yeah.
It was never, it was never aggressive. It was never never conflict. Like,
Yeah.
I want this and you want that. It was just always more discussion. And of course, some things would get pushed out and some things would rise up.
Yeah.
And then, so much sort of like becoming more politically savvy to deal with GLA and deal with, some degree, the changing attitudes about the East End, and accessibility, was being talked about in a big way. I mean, and like, how could something be this kind of like new dance, sort of like avant-garde, whatever you want to call it, and also accessible and communicated as accessible to a working class, economically, I called it stressed, and environmentally derelict area.
If you had to describe what it was more broadly, how would you pin it down?
Well, I just, it was outside of the established modes, basically, right? These were not, it was outside of the established modes in every sense of the word. And there was also the London Musicians Collective that, in Camden, that was also, just full of amazing musicians and incredible amount of exchange between musicians and dancers and performers, filmmakers. There was the Filmmakers Collective. So you hear what I'm saying? It was like the resources when, what you have now is a marketplace, and you have maybe not, and the funding goes towards kind of a business model, much more, and then it was like very little, derelict spaces, rough. And if we do this together, we can all do something ourselves with each other. And let's, sure, you want to come too? Great, So it was a much more open time.
It's more of an approach or an ethos or a way of living that didn't pin it down, like you say, to a business model or a particular thing. And I think that's what was so, when I look at the archive and I see what Chisenhale was doing at that time, it was so varied and diverse. And, there might be cha-cha-cha evenings with new performances, or there might be, workshops happening, or there might be a fair. That openness enabled it to kind of respond as it needed to different situations and different people or practices and needs, I suppose, in a way that is harder to do when you're restricted. Yeah.
It's more inclusive. I have to be careful with that word, in a way. I mean, when you start, I had cha-cha classes and all of that, that was already, I would say, phase 3, but the attitude of inclusivity, call it experimentation, or, permeating out, and, being aware that, at least in terms of Chisenhale, that we were in the middle of this on a residential street, so the kind of like, gee, people need to be invited in, it was just right in front of your face, and so the evolution comes from the creativity, right? The creativity of integrating more, hey, let's have the local kids in, oh, the local kids, oh, they like this, oh, so the adaptations were responsive, and the inventions were responsive. And that's where the creativity and the variety lived. lived.
Yeah. Well, I think that's in a way what New Dance was all about. It was kind of being conscious and aware of things that were going on in society, being conscious of what you were doing in the place that you were doing it and responding to that.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you very much.